Hello, this is another GM's log, and this one is another sample self-reflection, kind of humorously entitled How's My Driving?, where I intend to take a brief survey look at how I have been using the actual printed rules of the game in play. This is something that I believe needs to be done every now and again, to go back into the book and read, you know, and challenge our memory of the rules, and to examine how what is written has translated itself into play through us, the players. Now, this process is something that I go through regularly, but this particular video and this particular uh, iteration of the process is the direct result of a comment I received in the last couple of days, which very politely, I might add, pointed out a really basic and frankly very frustrating error that I have allowed to continue through the entire campaign so far, all 10 sessions. It hasn't affected that many roles ultimately, but it has affected some, and it is a very basic mistake, which is why we're on this page, basic operations, because now I'm once again rereading the rules in order and being careful not to skip through the sections where I think I remember the rules from the last time I played. It's an easy trap to fall into, one that I would think that I wouldn't fall into, but clearly have. What is the mistake, you may be wondering? Well, let's actually start there, because it's a very good one to begin with. There is a rule in Star Trek Adventures about assistance. It's possible for other characters who are present in the scene, who can logically be able to help, they can contribute one die to the dice pool. This is very cool. This die does not have to conform to the constraints of the setup for the lead character, meaning the lead might be doing a presence plus command task, and the person who's lending assistance might be contributing their insight plus science. So we've got different target numbers, and we're using different attribute and discipline combinations, but we're all working together toward the same goal. Now, all of this has been handled correctly in the campaign so far, but now we're getting to the point where this mistake has crept in, and there's no excuse for it. It's simply, flat out, an error that was made. So, what was that error? The rule states that in order for the assistance dice, for the additional dice contributed to the pool by whatever is helping the character out, whether that's the ship or a crew member or whatever, in order for them to be counted, at least one success must be rolled on one of the lead character's dice. This is the mistake that we made. We, because of my misinterpretation, my misremembering of the rule, have been applying it that the lead character must succeed. This is not at all the same thing. So the opportunity to have the assistance from the ship or from a crew member has been prevented in some cases where it would have applied, which may or may not have led to success. I'm not going to go back through all of the sessions to see how play was affected. Play was affected. What's important to me is that this incorrect application be corrected moving forward. I don't know if this is an easy mistake to make, but it's a mistake that cropped up, I think, because I didn't pay sufficient attention to my reread of the basic operations section. Everything seemed familiar, and this is not something that I can lay on the organization of the book. A first read is challenging with this book, the way that it's organized, the way that it very gradually works its way down to the point, and you actually have to look for the rules, and when you go back to look them up, they're hard to find, buried in the text as they are. But this error is entirely on me. And there was even a situation in play where players said the rule correctly, and I corrected them to an incorrect application of the rule. And so that's annoying too. So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Think back over play, choose a rule, make sure it's being applied correctly, or an order of operations or a particular procedure. Are we actually playing the game? Why do we do this? Partly, if you're at all interested in playing the game as written, this becomes important. But also, what if there is dissatisfaction with play? Maybe this can be laid on a misapplication of the printed rules. Or what if there is satisfaction with play and you discover it's because you have been, or you have changed the rules in some way, and you think, well, now we know. Either way. So this is one error. Another error, and one that's slowly getting better but is not yet, completely on point, is the decay of momentum. We're remembering it more often than not now, but there are still moments where that is not being handled perfectly. Now, it was much easier when I was using the physical threat and momentum tokens to manage this. Every time I changed the scene, somebody around the table would take a point of momentum away. We all knew the rule and it could be applied. So, in other words, this task wasn't solely in my hands, but playing online as we are with me having access to the document that shows momentum and threat, if I don't think of it in the moment, there's a chance that I'll forget, and so on and so forth. So this has caused me to reconsider how that's going to be applied, and I'm thinking that I will move the PowerPoint document that we're using for that, move that slide out where everybody can access it and turn over control of those pools to people who are not me. That will free me up, free up my screen, and make it so that it's a lot easier to check on the status of those pools whenever a player feels like it. So I think that is a good solution to the problem. It's not that we don't know the rule, it's that other things about the way that we play, the actual media through which we're playing the game, has a negative effect on the rule. But it's something to pay attention to. What else? Another thing which has not really come up into play, but maybe from how I have been describing it in the sessions, which may be affecting player choices, is about determination. I've been listening very closely and going back through other older sessions to how I talk about determination. That, well, how do we spend it? It's spent when values are relevant. We talk about invoking values, which is language I'd like to move away from. But ideally, when the situation of a scene and the value are in harmony, so we can imagine that the character feels that they're right about that particular value. This is an example that they might use later to talk about that value with a friend or with someone they wanted to give a life lessons to, or something like that, that we can spend determination. We can spend it on a variety of things. I'm hoping that the variety of things comes more to the fore for the players than the bonus die that has already rolled a 1 perfect opportunity situation. But more importantly, how do we earn more? How do we earn more? Well, there are 2 ways, and we've seen them a little more often recently. We can earn more determination by allowing a value to be complicated. Right? where a particular course of action or a particular compulsion or refusal to do something might be suggested to the player. And if they accept it because it's something that makes sense according to their character, then they would gain a point of determination. Right? They accept a negative consequence as determination is described on this very page, and in return, they receive a point of determination, which they could spend if there were another value involved in the scene that could be invoked positively. It's kind of a subtle thing, but it's an important thing. Next is challenging a value. Now, this isn't something that the game master lays upon them. This is something that they choose themselves as they recognize in play that, you know what, this is causing me to doubt that value. It may not cause me to walk away from it completely, but it is suggesting to me that I need to reassess. At that point, the value is crossed off and a point of determination is earned. So that distinction, I feel, from me as a player, hasn't been projected out forcefully enough in play. Now, it's all very clearly laid out, although hard to find in the text. So the players can certainly discover this on their own. But as the game master, I'm responsible for at least 50% of those opportunities, the complicating the values. So if I'm not totally clear on how that process works, or if I'm not making my thought process clear about why I am or am not complicating a particular value right now, then learning and internalizing this process is hampered. Okay. So these are specific areas where errors of either an actual rule or an error in implementation or an error in procedure have been made. Right, so rather than go on and on and on this particular topic, let's take a look at areas where my interpretation of a rule may be seen as an error, but it can also be seen as none. All right, so as you can see, by definition, this part of the video is really one large gray area. It's a matter of interpretation, or to draw on another franchise, it's, according to your point of view. But I do think it's important to talk about these things too. Now, observations from people who've watched the actual play, who had some questions, which sometimes I was able to answer to their satisfaction and sometimes wasn't. These relate to things like the use of threat in scenes or the structuring of extended challenges and tasks and that sort of thing. Well, not everything gets explained, of course, in the actual play about how something like a timed gated challenge might be being conceived, right? And so the insight into the game master's mind is not complete in those situations, but still questions can be raised, like how is the difficulty assessed, how were effects triggered and used. For the most part, I think I have answered all of those questions in annotations on the specific videos where extended challenges and the like take place, for more complicated roles or situations with very long-lasting benefits from roles were made. I've made an effort to annotate those videos accordingly. But I did want to talk about uses of threat. Now, from my perspective, and I feel this is supported by the text, both the original text and the cleaned up text that appears in the Klingon core book, I think that a view of threat as a means to change the situation in an interesting way, or to increase a challenge in a way that makes things feel like the escalation of scenes in a television episode, right? We have to remember the television logic, right? So it's not simply because the player characters are finding a challenge easy that you would make it harder. You would use threat to bring about the kind of dramatic challenge at a particular time where perhaps our kind of natural understanding of the flow of stories or our pre-programmed expectations about the flow of stories can be used to help the group create more satisfaction with play, either by doing something completely unexpected or by doing something that is expected. And that decision is tied not to the text, it's tied to the group's awareness of the group's tastes, their sense of what makes good entertainment. So that's not something that the game can actually really help us with in terms of its printed text. There are too many points of view. So if we look at threat as a way to change the scene, then how it is used becomes a way for the game master to play. They have put certain things into the preparation, and this is totally free. So there can be a cloaked Romulan vessel in the system. There can be a lurking threat in an alien artifact. There can be a betrayer on board in the crew, just by the game master deciding that they're there as part of setting up the episode or setting up a particular scene. But once play begins, then changes to how things are playing out, deepening of context, altering of circumstances, making things harder for some and easier for others. This is what threat is for. And the use of threat diminishes future threat. Probably. There are, of course, many ways during play that the threat pool will increase, right? NPC roles just being one of them. So we can't predict that a use of threat now will mean less threat in the future. And we don't have to feel constrained by threat as a limiter on the game master setting up scenes as they are supposed to do as part of their established role in this particular game. Threat is change, and when threat, the potential, the pool, is introduced into play, the threat is being realized. Whether it's coming out in small doses or coming out in large doses, representing a larger, more immediate threat, doesn't matter. So, when you watch how threat is being used in the actual play, what you'll see it doing is paying for different timing, or it's paying for the characters not being able to do something. It's paying for the players being informed of something that their characters will not be able to act on right now. Right? So in other sense, it's playing with context, it's playing with the sense of danger, it's playing with the medium of television, where we, the audience, are almost always treated to insight into what's really going on that the characters don't get to benefit from, and that heightens our sense of tension. This is often absent in role-playing games. So how can we bring this about with a clear signal about this is something that your character doesn't know, but this is also something that I want you to know and feel that tension about? We can use threat to bring this about. We can pay for, you know, changing the perspective, giving them a cutscene that their characters could never have access to, because the players are participants and they are audience. And this game, the way it is built, the way it is structured, I feel, and the way that threat works, allows us to address both viewpoints in the single player, their participant viewpoint, but also their audience viewpoint. I can spend some threat to prevent the character from knowing something right now while I'm introducing that exact same information to the player. So this is great for cliffhangers if a session has to end early, and it's great for building that sense of tension without making something overt or explicit have to happen. There doesn't have to be a fist fight in the corridor. There can instead be a cutscene to a threatening conversation somewhere else on the ship. Right. So it gives us more tools. So threat is a viable tool for expanding context. It doesn't simply have to be bringing in reinforcements, causing reversals, or creating problems for the main characters or the supporting characters that are in a scene. It has more flexibility than that, and it's, I feel, pretty clearly stated in the text, not just implied. So recently we used threat in ways that maybe not all groups would. We had a debate between characters. This was an actual debate. It was role-played. The players delivered in-game dialogue with in-game logic and rationale. And these 2 points of view met, and there was a sense among the players that it would be best to address this by using the system. Who would be persuaded? And how would the outcome of that debate potentially be modified? Would a problem be created, or would an advantage be created? Something along those lines. So some groups may shy away from this as seeming like player versus player. Well, of course it never was. It was character interacting with character, not even character versus character. They had two different potential courses of action, and each was trying to persuade the other, much like what happens between friends in real life. We try to persuade other people to what we think is a better course of action for them. So this is normal use of the system, and so normal resources are accessible. The characters can spend momentum. The characters can spend threat. And the dice pools will be generated, and the dice will be rolled, and the dice will be interpreted, and any momentum that is generated from it can be used however the players see fit. And so this way of handling in-character debate among the crew can seem startling to some, but it doesn't need to be. What we need to be aware of is if what is happening is seen as a way to use the system to disadvantage a player. And that is, of course, just bad play all around. That's a dysfunctional group, or at least a group that's heading toward dysfunction, which is not what it is that I'm talking about here. So if there's no reason, no external reason not to use the system is there and can be used. It doesn't have to be used. We might be able to role play through a debate and have a character accede to a different point of view because it simply makes sense. It's something that they didn't think about, or that character wouldn't have thought about, but wouldn't also be able to reject once it was pointed out, that kind of thing. So, the system doesn't have to be used, and it doesn't have to be avoided just because it's between two players. So there's that. Well, this debate situation escalated. These two characters have had some version of this debate now 3 times. And in the third time, we're getting close to a situation where the outcome of that debate could have real consequences on careers and the like. And so I made a ruling, I guess you could say, that in this situation, this supporting character that was involved was, kind of approaching NPC territory. And as we know, in Star Trek Adventures, NPCs don't generate momentum, they generate threat. And their actions and our uses of NPCs in the game can either heighten threat by them acting successfully toward a particular goal or acting in a particular way toward a goal, but they can also reduce threat because they'll be using that resource in order to improve their chances for success. Well, in this kind of final debate before a competency hearing, which you can see us working toward in the second session of the Court of Opinion episode, I made a ruling that the supporting character, Mbuto, would, if successful in this opposed role between the two characters, generate threat. Right? And why was that done? That was done because that character's proposal was by far the riskier one, right? And was priming the forces that are aligning against the better interest of the crew of the Avicenna, providing them with more opportunities to gain advantage against Korsakov. This all makes sense in the understanding of the scene. Now it turns out that Korsakov presented the better argument, according to the dice. And so that opportunity for the threat pool to increase was avoided. It's very interesting. So this gives us a lot of different avenues, a lot of different routes into connecting with the scene, whether on the in-character level or on a purely intellectual level or on a game mechanics level or on some mix of all of those, so that the tension can be heightened. So there is a certain, I guess, moving away from the science of applying the rules toward an art of interpreting the rules, evidenced at this end of the scale, at this end of the video. All right, so this brings about the end of this particular GM's log, one where I provide an example of how I like to evaluate my own driving. And I want to thank people who have pointed out things that they thought were awry or had gone astray in the actual plays, because this definitely helps with this process of going back through the rules every now and again to make sure that things are seated well in the memory, and not only that, are actually being applied according to how they actually work. Or when I do deviate, that I'm doing so within the spirit of the rules rather than my particular whim at a particular time. Those things are important to me, and so this is pretty much the way that I conduct that process. So I hope this has been interesting and or valuable, and as always, thanks for watching.